So, welcome to the Morunda podcast, where we discuss leadership in the healthcare industry. What have been effective styles and what can be learned from past mistakes? Today, we're lucky enough to have Tom Roberts with us, president of Cranberry Leadership, a firm that guides expats through the challenges of working abroad. Tom, great to have you. Please give us a quick introduction of what you've been up to since leaving UCB a few years ago.
Yeah, Phil, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, whether it's in a coffee shop or virtually across the world here. I worked for the pharmaceutical industry for about 21 years, with 11 of those being in Asia. I was in Japan for 3.5, 4 years. Then I was in Korea as president, general manager of UCB in Korea. Came back to Japan after 4 years there and finished up my time in Asia as the head of our neurology patient value unit, reporting directly into the CEO's table at UCB. And we had about 250 really great employees, about $1 billion remit, two giant Japanese partners. So all of the ingredients necessary to have a lot of good learning and harvesting of mistakes, and we like to call it, we kind of call it failure capital, harvesting of failure capital, making sure that we're taking a good look at all the things that we did. And that's where Cranberry came from. In around 2019, well, I guess 2018, decided to end my time at UCB, but I had to finish out until the end of 2019. Went back to university at age 50, which I don't recommend to anybody. That was a lot, and did the work necessary that I could become an executive coach working specifically with expat execs. So I didn't want to be the guy that had some experience and just decided to hang a shingle. I wanted to get the academic credentials behind me so that I could really help people to not make the mistakes that I made when I was working as an expat overseas, but also to make sure that I understand the cultural nuance from an academic side as well as a practical side. So we moved back to the United States in very late 2019 with about a 20-page business plan. And then in March of 2020, COVID hit, blew the business plan up, which was the best thing that ever happened to our business, because for the next 2 years, I spent working with a few clients, but primarily talking to expat executives all over the world in these very long form interviews that, if we had not had COVID, I never would have been able to do the interviews. I wouldn't have taken the time to do it, but we did about 42 interviews to date. These are 2 and 3 hour interviews to try to find the thin red string that ties all of our stories together, all the expats, executive stories together. And we just learned so much from that process and kind of cultivating that data and trying to put it to work. And honestly, it changed the entire complexion of the company that we were trying to build. So I'm probably one of the rare people that's really has a lot of gratitude for coronavirus, but it gave us our business in reality. So that's what we do now. We work with expat executives. We have branched out and started working with teams, and we're currently building a platform, a learning platform for senior director level people and above. And then we do our one-on-one coaching with VP and above, up to C-suite people with one-on-one coaching. So it keeps us really busy.
So you mentioned, kind of failures or making mistakes, or can you think of something kind of from your time as an expat executive, that failure or something that you had a great learning from?
I think there's too many for a podcast. In fact, the book that I'm about 80% finished writing is called Unforced Errors, and the subtitle is The Global Executive's Guide to Turning Mistakes into Milestones. And I made every single mistake I think that you could possibly make. In fact, the name of our company comes from a Japanese boss that I had. I actually took my direction from a foreign boss at UCB in my early days there, but my direct line supervisor was about a 60-year-old Japanese guy. And he told me one day, after I'd been there for about 6 months, he said, how do you think you're doing? And I said, I think I'm doing really well. We're making a lot of progress here. We're making a lot of movement here. And I said, but how do you think it's going? And he said, Tom-san, he said, you wield influence very well. And he said, you're very, very smart. And he said, you get things done. He said, but within the team, he said, you're like a cranberry. You leave a bitter taste with people. And, and I was like, that was not what I was expecting to come out of his mouth. And I said, can you give me more on that? And he said, no, he said, that's it. He said, you leave a bitter flavor in people's mouths. And it was subsequent to that I made a couple of really key errors with my team, big errors that at the 7 to 8 month mark, my chacho at the time was a Belgian guy, and he took me out to dinner and he said, I'm really curious as to how you think everything's going. I was very cocky and kind of aggressive. I said, I think it's going really, really well. And I said, we're moving these pieces around. We're doing this. We're putting these people in this place. And I kind of looked at him and his face was very blank. And I said, well, more importantly, how do you think it's going? And he said, well, I have two problems now. And so just sent a chill down my spine. I just moved my family overseas 7 or 8 months before. We were really enjoying our time there. And now I was thinking I would have to move. And I said, well, please tell me. And he said, well, number one, he said, you really have alienated your team with the way that you are trying to plug American solutions into Japanese problems. And he said, you're forcing things that don't need to be forced in the context of a Japanese business. And you're not listening to your team as much as you need to. And I, I was a little bit stunned, and we were in a very nice public restaurant, and I was having a moment, and I said, well, I really don't want to know, but what is the second problem that you have? And he said, the second problem I have is that you're not aware of it. And that really took me back. And I remember leaving that dinner. And he's a very happy guy. And Phil, you know the man very well. He's a very happy guy. And he kind of looked at me and said, well, shall we eat? And I thought that's the very last thing on earth that I want to do is to eat. But I got through dinner. And at the end of that, he was very clear.
So why did you think you were doing so well? What was it? What was it? How did you quantify it? Was it sales or was it?
Yeah. So progress towards a launch. We had a very important launch that was happening there. And I had I had launched this product in other spaces, namely in the United States, and had helped out with the European progression of this product. And so I was kind of an expert on this one particular product in a disease state that is very specialized in epilepsy. And we were checking the boxes very well, but I became aware that I was checking the boxes out of sheer will from my part and not bringing the team along with me. And I think that's where the big mistakes were made.
So I was speaking to an expat the other night. She from the States, and she'd been here a little while, and she's like, "Oh, Phil, you know, my team, the meetings, they're passive aggressive. You know, I, just, she was clearly really frustrated, and been in Japan a little while. Someone like that, that sort of cultural difference and sort of communication style, and sometimes decisions are made away from the meeting. What advice could you give someone like, that is clearly, they're fantastic probably in the States, but it's maybe less fantastic in Japan?
Well, I had a teacher one time, a teacher told me one time a statement that I did not understand until I moved to Japan. And she said, you don't take your high school trophies with you to college.
Mm.
And I never understood what that really meant. But the reality is everything that got you to a position to where you were able to take an overseas role, it takes a lot of work to get to that point. And then they often frame it up as you won because you were in competition with one or two other people and you won. And so there's almost an arrogance, or it's softer than arrogance. It's more like a hubris that you know what you're doing really, really well. And if everybody will just listen to you, then everything will be fantastic. And the reality is you've got to listen to the people on the ground who have been in this market for long, long periods of time, longer than you will be there. And you've got to listen to the nuance of how the business operates and the rhythm of how the business operates. And particularly in Japan, you're right. The meetings in America, in our particular case, I worked in our Atlanta office for a long time. And the loudest guy in a debate typically had the other upper hand, and the loudest guy kind of won. And I learned pretty quickly, and this may be a little too harsh, but in Japan, the loudest guy is kind of viewed as the village idiot. And so I had a long stint of 6 or 7 months of being the village idiot, making my profound proclamations without really knowing the market. And then as my team got quieter and quieter, and they also nodded very vigorously when I would say something, I thought, I'm the smartest guy that has ever lived. I'm making all these fantastic decisions and comments about this market. But the reality was I was going on this path, and the entire team knew that we needed to go on this path. And that's where the disconnect really happens.
Right. Yeah. Another common scenario. I met this guy. This is several years ago at Novartis in the old Azabu offices. Just kind of got off the boat, just off the plane, and caught up with him in his office. Like, been there maybe 6 months, and he's like, "Oh, dude, um, I don't like the people. I don't like the culture. I don't like the meetings. I'm not really." There was nothing good about Japan. The family's not happy and was good. Met him 2 years later, loved it, and had fallen in love with Japan. Family was happy, didn't want to leave, was trying to get an extension. So what? And we've all met, people like this that have eventually fallen in love with their new country. What's a shortcut people how can they, that frustration of like 6 months of like trying to adapt, is it just kind of shut up and listen, or what sort of tips would you give them?
I think the biggest thing that I learned is to get help, because after that dinner where I was told that I was doing nothing right, I was put in front of an executive coach. He was a big American guy, big kind of loud kind of American guy. He'd been in Japan for 25 years. He really understood how the culture operated, and he was able to kind of take me apart brick by brick and then put me back together. It was a very humbling thing, because in the beginning, you're chosen. You're the chosen one to go and take over this business. And then within 6 or 8 months, you understand that you're failing. And Phil, when we did these interviews with these 42 people so far, we found a very standard curve. In the first 6 months, everything's like a vacation and everything's wonderful and the family's happy. You're happy. You're going to work in a new environment. People are listening to you. And then things start to change a little bit, and the pressure from HQ becomes a little bit more. And HQ doesn't care how things work in Japan typically. They just want results. And so then that curve, your attitude, your mood, and your ability to produce starts to go down. And what we found in this research is that as that process goes down, there's a splitting off of two paths as it goes down. You can continue to go down until you're in full blown crisis, where your teams are not responding, where your boss is probably upset, and then your global bosses are not happy. You're not producing, and you're starting to wonder whether you made the right decision or if you even need to stay in the same job. That's one path. The other path is to get help and to try to thrive.
Mm.
And what we found is that the people who reach out to help have a much higher chance of reaching that happiness time sooner, because number one, they learn they're not alone. Number two, they learn the heuristics and tricks to make sure that they understand how to survive. And they understand kind of the concept of intercultural triangulation, where you try to find out where you are amongst all these cultures that are pulling and pushing on you. And through that understanding and through working with an executive coach or with just a trusted advisor or a group of people that have been through it, they're able to get back up on the upswing. And I found that very comforting. It was, of course, it was too late for me, because I found these things out during the research, but I found it very comforting to know that everybody typically is going through something similar if they move to a culture that's dramatically different than their own.
Mm.
A French guy can move to London and do pretty well pretty quickly. A British guy moving to China or an American guy moving to Japan and Korea, it takes time, and that time is not something that you're allowed to have, because you're held bound by this long list of things you need to achieve when you get there.
Right. Okay. Going to put you on the spot. 3 do's and 3 don'ts. Go.
Don't try to replicate past wins. And I think that's the easiest trap to fall into. I found myself I had a guy on my team who was about 10 years older than me, and he was the father of all things in epilepsy around our product. And I found myself in the early days kind of uncharacteristically hyper arrogant about it. I'm like, okay, look, I understand that's how they do it here, but I was sent here to do it the way we did it in the US, and that's the way we need to do it. So thank you for your suggestion. I'm exaggerating for effect, but I mean, that's basic message that he received. So of course your team shuts down when that happens and things like that. The second thing is to be very mindful that silence means something different, especially in East Asian countries than it does in your home country, especially if you're from big five European countries, US, or similar westernized kind of environments like that. Silence means something very different. You can misinterpret it to mean acquiescence. You can misinterpret it to mean full agreement. You can misinterpret it to mean they don't understand, or you can misinterpret it to mean outward hostility. And what I found was I was beginning to, because of the pressure I was under, I was making assumptions on what that silence truly meant.
Mm.
And that causes problems. That causes a lot of problems. And then the third thing comes directly out of our research. And this is almost every single individual. And I swear I want to do a TED talk on this someday. When you go overseas, you're being told that you're chosen for this role. You've been given a nice package so your family can move and live there. And immediately you start feeling intense pressure to perform. And one interesting thing we found from this research is that there's always this list of things that you have to do, this very long list of things that you have to do. And more likely than not, there's kind of a secret, quiet list that doesn't show up on a strategy deck. It's, we're going to change this team. We want you to do it very quietly, or we want you to move these pieces around very quietly. It's kind of a secret list.
Mm.
All of that puts pressure. So Phil, what we learned is that pressure in that sense absolutely kills empathy and curiosity.
Mm.
That pressure kills empathy and curiosity. Now, you can't write a book today about empathy and curiosity. It'll never make the bestseller list because nobody wants to talk about empathy and curiosity. But the reality is, if you're unable, because of the pressure you're feeling, to really collaborate well with your local colleagues or ask them the questions that you need to ask and have answered, then you're going to miss things and you're going to make mistakes. And the more pressure that most of the people we interviewed felt, the more pressure they felt, the less able they were to make clear decisions, to make good relationships with their team, and also just to have that innate curiosity that we need to learn as fast as possible. So I think those are the three things that I would very much say don't do.
And quickly, three do's.
Recognize, I guess the first thing I would say is recognize that speed does not equal speed. You're going to be feeling all kinds of pressure from your HQ network and your bosses and your bosses' bosses to get things done as fast as possible. What we found in our research and also just our personal experience is that speed does not equal speed, but patience plus reflection actually enables you to move faster. So patience plus reflection actually equals speed. When we go in and try to change everything all at once, bad stuff happens. I think we're learning that in global economics right now. When we try to change too much without the perspective and knowledge of what's going on, then that desire for speed actually becomes something that slows you down. I think the second thing for me was to become very mindful of my own energy and resilience. I have a resting angry face sometimes when I'm thinking. My team asked my 8-year-old daughter one time, "What do we need to know about your dad?" in a cocktail reception thing. And my daughter said, "Well, just know that when he looks mad, he's probably just thinking." And so you have to be cognizant of your energy and your resilience, because the thing that I didn't realize is that everyone is looking at you for clues of how you feel that day, what your decision points are going to be. They're trying to predict things. They're trying to see what kind of mood you're in. So being very mindful of that. And then one really interesting thing that I learned over time was, and this is a hard one, but is to push back on your HQ in very visible ways.
Mm.
So especially in Japan, where the thought process is that Japan is different. Everything is different here. And they want me to believe that very much. You can go one of two ways. You could say, no, it's really not different here, when the reality is it is. Or you can be seen by your team to push back strongly against HQ and to carry the flag for the Japan business or the Korea business, wherever you are. And in that visible pushback, your team says, okay, this guy is actually listening. He's on our side and he's trying to make things happen to the point that he's pushing back
Right.
on his own.
Going to bat for the team. So, talk about the family for a minute. I remember asking Reed Mora, the great late Reed Mora, this kind of question years ago. What advice would he give to sort of the expats coming to Japan? And he very bluntly said in Reed's fashion, don't join the American club. So, what what advice would you've dragged Michelle and the kids around the world, and the kids are truly international and truly wonderful. But what advice would you give to the to the supporting family?
Tokyo American Club, the best feeder of alcoholics into Alcoholics Anonymous ever created, right? I think the mistakes that we made, and my wife is actually, she has written some papers and some different things about this concept of being a trailing spouse, which she finds absolutely offensive. If you want to make an enemy very quickly, ask my wife how her trailing spouse adventure was.
Mm.
She had a career also in a pharmaceutical company. And when the company came to me, they said, you're going to be gone for 24 months and then you're coming back. And so my wife said, yeah, well, I can unplug for 24 months. That's not a problem. And at the end of 24 months, they offered me another job. And eventually I had 5 positions in 11 and a half years. And her career was blown to bits. I mean, her career ended the progression that it was, because 11 years you can't make up. So you've got to understand that the pressure that your spouse is feeling, male or female, it doesn't matter. The pressure that they're feeling is real. So we finally came to this understanding. She said, look, you were just getting up and going to work. Exactly the same thing you were doing in the United States. You were just getting up and going to work. So I thought your life's the same as it always has been. And I said, well, yeah, but I was getting up and going to work and you were there, and I thought your life was exactly the same as it had been. And so communication becomes like a real huge key to the whole thing. And then embracing the adventure of the whole thing. I cannot tell you how many times that my wife and I would be at some strange, crazy, beautiful place, and we would look at each other and we would say, what the hell are we doing here? I mean, how, this is not any path that either one of us set out to do. So embracing that, the beauty of what you're doing and understanding that it will end at some point in time is really critical. Yeah. Managing the expectations from each other is huge. And also, once again, managing your own resilience and energy so that you're not coming home and kicking the dog and yelling at the kids because your job is taking all your life out of you.
Right. Well, that's about it. Any closing remarks or final thoughts?
I think the key thing that has been really important for us in this research that we've done is this concept of intercultural triangulation. It's just understanding that you have these pressures and these cultural pressures that are pulling and pushing on you. And I'll give you the 30-second example. I was an American guy working in Korea who had recently finished a job in Japan, who had a Moroccan boss who reported to an American guy in a Belgian company. And so my morning calls and meetings could be juggling up to 5 or 6 different cultural expectations. Plus, we had a very strong company culture at UCB as well that was different than all of these country cultures. And so we try to tell our folks that get a tool, if it's Aaron Myers or Hofstede's work, and really triangulate your position between all of the cultures that are affecting you, not just Japan and US for me, but for me, it was Japan, US, Morocco, Belgium. It was just a lot of different cultural and UCB. So the cultural expectations that were pulling and pushing on you, because that is an energy stealer. So the best advice I can have is just to get help from either a professional person who knows what they're doing or a professional team that knows what they're doing, or just surround yourself with people that have been doing it for a long time and make sure you're spending time with them, exercising, having a cocktail, having dinner so that you can learn from them. Just as I learned from you, because Phil, whether you know it or not, sitting around with you and we had a weekly meeting with a couple of good guys from all over the place that we went on Saturday mornings, and those little meetings alone allow you to know you're not alone, and it just teaches you from the people who have been doing it.
Right. Yeah. That association is so important that yeah, that you're not alone, that whatever you're experiencing is normal. It's going to be okay and you're going to get through it. But Tom, thank you so much. I have a list of expats I'll be sending this to. And so, yeah, fantastic. Always great to catch up. And thanks for your time.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Phil. Anytime.